Welcome to session 3.2. In this session, we take you along all steps in the execution phase. This session is aimed at trial organizers, solution providers, developers, and technicians. It is advised as well for practitioners contributing a trial. By completing this session, you understand the elements, structure, and outcomes of each step in the execution phase, the expected readiness level in each step of the execution phase, and the process you take your trial set up more mature by every step you take.
This session is about the different steps to take within the execution phase. Note that this phase does not only contain the actual trial itself, but also the more practical and technical preparations, and, most importantly, the rehearsals that lead up to running a successful trial. The main objective of this phase is to assess innovative socio-technical solutions by gathering objective data. Going through all steps within this phase can take 2 weeks for a small-scale trial, and up to 3 months for a very large trial. All roles should be involved in this phase: the trial owner as a leader, the practitioner coordinator, the evaluation coordinator, the technical coordinator, the trial participants and observers, and all other supportive staff that will make a trial happen. Let's start with an example.
Episode 27, Trial Integration Meeting. Even after the preparation phase, the different elements of your trial are not yet exactly fixed. They can still be tweaked in the execution steps. It starts with increasing the amount of people involved in your trial, like the solution providers, the participants and the observers, and getting them aligned with your ideas. The other already involved colleagues knock at your door and ask you, "Hey, are you finally done with your preparation phase? It seems endless. When do we start?" You feel their enthusiasm to do something concrete to assess the solutions. They are eager to solve the problem. And of course, they get impatient. You decide to skip the explanation of why a good preparation is needed. You know you can jump over it because your colleagues are fully aware of the methodology and they adopted it as well, despite their initial grumbles. Full speed ahead, that is what they ask from you. The Trial Integration Meeting, or TIM in short, or TIM in short, is already the first step of the execution phase. Both solution providers come over to your place and show their solutions to the other participants involved in your trial. It is a great opportunity to meet and discuss the solution's full range of functionalities, as well as every angle of the gap. During this demonstration, the solutions do exactly what is expected of them, and everyone is happy. Without any issue, a flood prediction can be exported as a map in the time requested. At the same time, you discover data needs to be provided to the solution providers. A digital terrain model is necessary input. However, such a detailed terrain model is not available given your budget and time constraints. Together with your technical colleague and the solution providers, you decide to use available open data from other terrains just across the border, which can be used to prove the value of both solutions. During the trial integration meeting, a basic plan of using the solution is drafted by drawing out the innovation line. You first take the baseline you have drafted, which depicts your rock-in-the-shoe process. Then you discuss it with the solution providers and your fellow crisis managers. Where do you feel the solutions can make a difference? You of course already have some ideas of your own, but you let the others speak their mind too. You write down how this innovation changes the baseline process. Are there new roles, or is a role not needed anymore? Is there new information, and who gets it? And by which means? The original aim was to get a better understanding of the flood dynamics, meaning how the water floods a certain area over time. You present the preparation team the following use case. First, a message is sent out of an approaching extremely high water level in the region's main river. The participants work as crisis management staff, receiving this information containing predicted water levels in the river, information on weak spots, and the technical condition of levees. Then, they need a model to assess the impact of a breach. Of course, the probability of breaching and thus flooding is an important question in real life, but in this trial, assessing the probability of a breach is not in scope. During the trial, you would like to focus only on the impact if such a breach happens. When the staff has an overview of how the flood flows through the city in case of a potential breach, they see if and when each part of the city starts to flood. They will be given a list of important buildings and neighbourhoods which can be evacuated, and how much time and resources it will take to evacuate these buildings and neighbourhoods. By combining the flood model and the information on buildings and neighbourhoods, they can determine an evacuation strategy, documented in a plan stating the optimal order of evacuation and how many resources are needed for this. When they have come up with this plan, your trial comes to an end. Episode 28. Technical and Practical Preparations. After the successful trial integration meeting, all involved parties now know which scenario you want to play out, how the solutions are foreseen to contribute in this context, and thus which innovation line you would like to try out. Furthermore, you have spent some time to detail out the evaluation plan and the data collection plan. You can elaborate the scenario even more, and you know what to prepare in terms of technical matters and logistics. On the technical side, your colleagues and the software developers of the solution providers jointly work on getting all systems up and running. They construct a scenario of repetitive, severe rains in the meteorological database and link this database with both solutions. They also configure in these solutions the technical state of the city's dikes and levees and a height model of the area in which the crisis will be played out. With help of the simulator provider, they configure the transport calculator such that if an evacuation strategy is given to it, it will calculate the time it will take to act out this plan. And of course, the other tools of the testbed technical infrastructure are connected. The observation templates are configured for the observer support tool according to the data collection plan. And the scenarios, storylines and injects are configured in the trial management tool. On the logistical side, the rooms for the dry runs and the trial are reserved, and a floor plan is drafted for all hardware, furniture, as well as the positions of participants and observers. Luckily, your office manager asks you for how many people lunch, tea and coffee is to be arranged. You make sure all catering aspects are dealt with, as it is okay to present your trial participants the biggest flood your region has ever seen, but it is completely unacceptable for them to handle such a crisis without a good cup of coffee. Episode 29. Dry Run 1. Dry Run 1 is meant for testing all the technical and practical issues. This means this will be the first overall rehearsal with all stakeholders involved in the trial. So, your fellow crisis management experts, the solution providers, and the technical support team will meet in real life. You decide to organise, as Dry Run 1, a tabletop session with all participants and with the solutions operating. The technical setup will be realised and tested before this tabletop starts. Although one day might be sufficient, you decide to organise a 2-day event. All participants are there on the first day, and you reserve the second day to review the run-through with your core committee and solution providers. Subgroups and parallel agenda items are not wanted, to avoid clusters and divisions without overview. You open Dry Run 1 with an explanation of the scenario and the trial setup. You explain that this first dry run with all participants is very important to try to collect the data according to the envisioned data collection plan. That is why the dry run will be managed by you, and you will run it step by step. After this briefing, you present the playbook. The main aim is to understand the trial's overall timetable, who is responsible for doing what and when, and how does all information flow through the different tools and systems in use. After some plenary questions from the participants, they move to their designated places. In the meantime, you ensure that the final test of the technical setup is done. You are sure that everything works and that all systems and tools have been integrated into the test bed technical infrastructure. In the afternoon, you do the step-by-step run-through of the scenario. Dry Run 1 is the first time you see the innovation line in action, with the solutions being used and interlinked with other operational systems and procedures. You come up with tweaks and tasks for further configuring the scenario. Unfortunately, during the dry run, some participants start a discussion on the baseline. You realise that you could have explained this more thoroughly in the briefing. So you decide to incorporate this better in your sheets on the trial context and the gaps. And you check as well whether your direct colleagues have a correct and full understanding of the baseline. This new briefing is to be tested during Dry Run 2 later on. Another decision you make is to use 2 teams for the baseline and 2 teams for the innovation line instead of only 1. The reason for this is a better comparability of results. Luckily, a lot of people indicated their interest in participating. Even 2 crisis managers from your neighbouring countries heard about your trial via the C-Mine network and want to participate. With so much interest, you can form 4 teams of 4 persons each, so 16 participants in total. Directly after Dry Run 1, you evaluate the practical and evaluation-related issues with your team. Does the data collection plan fit the solutions? Is it reasonable? Is the data collection method feasible in regards of planning and amount of people in the room? The evaluation of Dry Run 1 leads to practical recommendations, a sharp discussion on the way forward, and an action plan for Dry Run 2. At the moment, your team could easily say yes, okay, on all the checks you did, so you are ready to proceed. Up to Dry Run 2. The full dress rehearsal. Episode 30, Dry Run 2. Right before the start of Dry Run 2, you are summoned to meet your organisation's director. "Why all this fuss?" he blurts out. "What are all these guys doing here? What exactly are you doing?" You keep your nerve and explain to him once more from the beginning what the trial is up to. That while doing all the specific steps in preparing the trial, more and more things get fixed without losing focus on the main objectives. You also add that participants like to be involved because they see the trial as a perfect way to assess to what extent the selected solutions will do exactly what they claim to do and whether that is also what you need. And that the organisation is learning not just to organise a logical and coherent event, but also to find optimal solutions for persistent gaps. Your director gets convinced by your pitch. He even asks politely to be present at the Dry Run 2 later that week, just to see what is happening. But that is a difficult question for you. Why? You will be running through the scenario as if it was the real trial, and you don't want to have people around just watching, not having a role or a task. They would disturb the rehearsal or could give the other participants an unsafe feeling. But saying no is not an option either. Not only because he is the director, but also because his presence could create organisational backing for your trial. You agree on his attendance in the first half hour. He will open the Dry Run 2, welcome the participants, and stress the fact that they contribute to a relevant piece of work. After that, he trusts you to run the rehearsal well and will be informed later that week about the outcome. And so it goes. Your director opens the Dry Run 2 and you run through your scenario. The scenario is clear and easy. The river's water level is rising, and the city of Kazan is about to flood. Teams are asked to assess and analyse the situation and come up with an evacuation strategy. They should indicate the required order of evacuation as well and as quickly as they can. And so they do. Later that afternoon, you look back with your colleagues and solution providers and see that it turned out to be quite a nice event. In fact, it would have been a very decent trial as the participants used the solutions intensively and the scenario turned out to be realistic and immersive. And, most importantly, the observers and the infrastructure collected a lot of useful data. Of course, you have a list of last-minute adjustments like the number of chairs and tables, location of monitors, and some attention on stronger Wi-Fi connections. But the most important one on that list is to order a bit more cookies and coffee for you as trial staff. So you jointly conclude you are ready for the real work. Let the trial begin. Episode 31. Trial Execution. At the day of the trial, you and your trial staff colleagues arrive early at the office. Together with the solution providers, you do a last check on all systems and then welcome all the trial participants. In your briefing, you once more implant in the participants' minds to focus on data collection. 2 teams play the baseline, and after that, 2 other teams play the innovation line with the 2 different solutions. Every team has 1 observer, using a checklist on the Observer Support tool to observe the necessary and crucial moments. The observers have already been briefed the day before. In the baseline run, you provide the teams with a paper map. The map indicates for every section the probability of flooding and the water height if it floods. But this map does not provide an overview of how long it will take for an area to flood. You also provide the baseline team a list of locations that can be evacuated. The solutions in the innovation line show on a digital map how the flood flows in time over the terrain. By dragging the time slider, you see the flood growing bigger, like watching a disaster movie. Just like in the baseline, both innovation line teams are provided a list on paper with locations that can be evacuated. Immediately, the participants of the innovation line air the wish, "It would be great if you could see these locations directly on the solutions map interface." The baseline runs. And then, after the briefing, it is finally time to run the scenario you and your team have prepared. Team 1 takes the baseline map, and after a little more than 77 minutes, they come up with their evacuation plan. After a short coffee break, Team 2 steps in, which is formed by 4 experienced incident commanders. They take the same baseline map and hand in their plan within 74 minutes. But before leaving for lunch, both teams are asked to fill in a questionnaire about how they experienced the trial and the use of the paper map. So far, it all seems to run very smoothly. You check whether all observations and questionnaires are correctly stored, and you leave the room as well for a quick lunch break. The innovation line runs. When you return from lunch, Team 3 is already waiting for you in the trial room to start their innovation line run with Solution 1. They immediately start to work on their task, actively using the solution. You are surprised that after a little more than half an hour, they state they are ready and give you their plan. It looks very good. With a cup of tea, you welcome the 4 members of Team 2. This team consists of 2 experienced colleagues and 2 crisis managers from neighbouring countries. They first had a nice tour of your headquarters and are now ready to try out Solution 2. During the run, they seem to be really enthusiastic about the scenario and how to come up with an evacuation strategy. After approximately 1 hour, they hand in their plan. Finally, you relax. The 4 runs are over. Your evaluation colleague hands out a final questionnaire to the team members to record what they think of the trial and how they experienced the solutions. She also collects all observations. When all is stored and a backup is made, you and your colleague in the role of participant coordinator thank the participants and wave them goodbye. That was it. That was the trial.
It is highly advised that when organising a trial, you draw out the process in advance. Of course, every trial is different. However, you can list some universal elements that are almost impossible to skip in one form or the other. We can easily arrange them into a simple process flow, as displayed. As you know from former sessions, knowing your gaps and context kicks off the whole process. Then you prepare the trial using an iterative co-creation approach. But to fully mature the product, which is a trial, you need to integrate all elements and test your design in action during the dry runs. This integration, dry running, and finally running the trial is what we call the execution phase. It needs to be remembered that this phase is not the end of the process. This same process is included in the TGM. Specification of trial gaps and context is what we call Step 0, the topic of Session 2.1. The iterative, co-creative design is done by following the 6-step approach, which you can revisit in Sessions 2.2 and 2.3. Integration transforms into the so-called Trial Integration Meeting, TIM in short. You'll learn about it in Session 3.3. Extensive details on dry runs 1 and 2 can be found in Session 3.4. Once the actual trial is done, the evaluation phase starts. Refer to Sessions 4.1 up to 4.4 to learn all about this phase. Methodological and practical preparation consists of 4 main points: understanding what we want to achieve and in what direction practical implementation should go, understanding the practical limitations and maturing chosen methods, understanding what we can achieve and how we are going to do that, and fine-tuning selected methods and overcoming technical issues. But can we strictly separate the preparation phase and the execution phase? Most probably not. When organizing a trial, you should anticipate that for most of the time, multiple activities must run in parallel. By this approach, you keep control over all preparations and avoid them to develop into 2 separate or even more misaligned tracks. Can we then set any precise borders? No, we can't either. Practical and technical preparations depend on choices made while following the methodology, and practical limitations restrict the amount of options while following the steps of the methodology. However, some things first need to be fixed first, before proceeding with others. For example, you need a research question defined before starting to write the scenario. That's why the process is better depicted by a continuous line oscillating between methodological and practical preparations, with milestones realized by finishing and freezing some parts of overall trial plan. The goal within the execution phase is to progress with 3 important steps: testing, integrating, and rehearsing, starting from individual components of which performance should be confirmed, through orchestration of elements into one integrated environment, and ending with dry running and almost finished trial setup. Initial testing is focused on checking the individual elements of a trial design in a broad perspective. For instance, to check whether every technical component works in the context of your trial, or checking whether your scenario outline is realistic. When integrating, you link up these individual elements in one overall trial setup. It concerns aligning the perspectives of the practitioners, solution providers, and trial committee. It also provides the space for discussion amongst all these stakeholders about the objectives you want to achieve with your trial. Rehearsing is focused on testing all preparations and decisions made. There you still have time to adjust them if needed. Remember, the range of your rehearsals in the dry runs should cover almost every element of the upcoming trial. If it is not tested, you are unsure whether it will work out as you have intended, and thus you should consider everything that has not been tested as not working. But, although the TGM is iterative and has a co-creative approach, when going through it, it needs to lead to concrete outcomes. That's why in the presented scheme, we have identified the major moments for achieving readiness for execution. As described, you cannot design without testing, and you cannot execute without sometimes tailoring the design to fit the trial better. That's why the methodological preparation overlaps with practical arrangements. The outcomes of both tracks are validated and further ironed out during the technical integration meeting, the TIM. At this meeting, you decide with all persons involved in the preparation and execution how the trial will be run. What is practically possible? What technical developments are needed? What are the baseline and innovation line to be run? Which scenario will be run? Which data will we collect? And at which location and on which days will the trial be executed? Then you proceed with further design maturation up to the point when everything is ready for execution. So, to wrap up all steps within the execution phase, see this scheme. The trial integration meeting aligns the perspectives of the practitioners, solution providers, technicians, and trial committee. The TIM is followed by a period of integration. The scenario side, the evaluation side, the technical side, and other practical matters are further worked out. It might be the longest and most active part of the execution phase. Dry Run 1 serves as a first confirmation of readiness. Here you run your trial design for the first time, testing out the location, the technical aspects, and the high-over scenario and trial script. After Dry Run 1, it is necessary to plan for Dry Run 2. After all necessary adjustments, Dry Run 2 serves as a final confirmation of readiness during a full dress rehearsal of your trial. Only if really necessary, you can make some final adjustments after Dry Run 2. By then, your trial is ready for execution. It is extremely important to systematize these steps within the execution phase, because here each step is clearly dependent on success of the previous one. It can be helpful to make good use of the structure of the trial action plan. It provides a helping hand to trial organizers by listing all methodological, technical, and practical things to think about when setting up a trial. This document template is available for you to document all decisions made while preparing your trial and is further explained in Session 5.1. Now we take a look on a timeline for a small trial, basic but still being realistic and feasible. We take the 112 call example. Let's say the process was initiated by 2 dispatch center operators and a researcher. They talked about a well-known gap concerning the issues with pinpointing the exact position of the caller. They thought it can be bridged by automatic GSP positioning via a mobile app. They gave themselves a month to gather more information and arranged a kickoff meeting afterwards. During that 2-day-long kickoff meeting, they went throughout the iterative design process, decided how to collect data, planned the evaluation, and came up with a basic scenario. They decided to have a trial as a part of the next Novice 112 operator training course. 2 weeks ago, they met again to have a trial integration meeting. They brought their colleagues, a dispatch center app provider, and an experienced training and evaluation specialist. During one day, they matured the planning and set a date for Dry Run 1. Dry Run 1 went well, but not flawlessly. That's why, after a short evaluation session, they introduced some minor changes. At Dry Run 2, everything went smoothly. They spent the following week on printing the materials and preparing for their trial. After its end, they analyzed the data collected and published an article with conclusions. And now something more ambitious, a longer and more complicated schedule, like for a trial done in the Driver Plus project. This timeline is for a very large trial that is co-organized by numerous entities and is very advanced, both theoretically and technically. This integration and tech-oriented testing needs a significant amount of human resources. That's why we decided to construct that extensive work plan. We begin with an informal period that we here call the pre-trial stage. It took a few months of less intensive creative thinking and exchange of ideas to come up with a basic concept of what the trial was about. Then we arranged a broader meeting with experts and practitioners to double-check our concept. Let's call it a kickoff. This resulted in forming a trial committee and defining an action plan for the following months. We utilized the TGM iterative planning method and together defined the upcoming work. We agreed on the overall objective, the gaps, and the context, and we made 2 loops through the 6-step approach. Based on these gaps and research questions, the solutions were chosen. Next, we scheduled the trial integration meeting in order to thoroughly examine the selected solutions and worked out which integration tasks were to be done. We also confronted the practitioners and experts with the draft scenario, the set of research questions, the data collection plan, and evaluation approaches. All these elements came together during the integration period between the TIM and Dry Run 1. During that event, we tested the full setup for the first time and identified elements which still were not working properly, tasks that were unfeasible, or other elements that needed fixing before the trial. As our trial was very big, Dry Run 2 was also big. A full final rehearsal of technology, staff, the script, and the assessments methods we selected. It was carried without shortcuts and showed us that the trialing environment was ready for a real trial run. After Dry Run 2, we had a short period for the last practical preparations and other logistic tidying up, and then we executed the trial and collected a very large amount of data that helped us to come to conclusions in the evaluation phase. The iterative process needs to lead to some final arrangements. That's why we attach such significance to achieving the readiness for execution. As described, you cannot design without testing, and you cannot execute without sometimes adjusting the design to fit the trial better. That's why the methodological preparation overlaps with practical arrangements, and that these are highly dependent on one another. You need a trial integration meeting to get all persons involved in the trial fully aligned, and then you must proceed with further design maturation up to the point when all aspects are ready for execution. Completing the above table means that you are truly ready to conduct a trial. Please note that omitting one or more elements will result in the need of finishing them during later stages and can have an impact on the validity of your trial results. Let's recap the inputs and outputs of the execution phase. The input in this phase are the selected solutions, based on going through the first 2 or 3 loops of the 6-step approach. The output after of this phase is the raw data stemming from the trial run. This data is then used in the evaluation phase. Let's recap useful methods and tools that are recommended for use in the execution phase. The most important methods are those you have selected for data collection, both for qualitative as well as quantitative data, because how you want to assess the solutions drives all other choices you make. Tools that are recommended to use are, of course, the solutions, but also the testbed technical infrastructure and simulators linked to it, the observer support tool, and the trial action plan to document all preparations you make. During this execution phase, you basically have to check off 3 events: the TIM, successful tests during Dry Run 1, and a successful full dress rehearsal of your trial script in Dry Run 2. Also, make sure you have documented all your decisions and preparations in the trial action plan.